The rain hammered down, each drop a tiny, spiteful punch against the worn canvas of my duffel bag. My entire life was on the curb, a scuffed suitcase, a guitar I hadn't played in years, and the rain-slick duffel, holding everything else. Kala stood framed in the doorway of what used to be my home, a cruel, satisfied smirk on her face. Her voice was like glass shards in the wind, sharp and cold. "Maribel, you've overstayed your welcome. The lock code's changed. Don't even try." A sudden frantic ringtone cut through her laughter. She pulled her phone from the pocket of her new, impossibly expensive silk robe. The smirk dissolved instantly, replaced by a mask of pure terror. She answered, her voice a shaky whisper. "What do you mean? It's all gone? It's all gone? Before I begin this story, can you tell me where in the world you're listening to from?" The house was a living memory of my mother, Neoma. Every squeaking floorboard, every faded swatch of wallpaper, felt like her presence. She had left it all to me when she passed, not in some grand, dramatic will, but with a simple handwritten note tucked into a shoebox filled with recipes. The note said, "This house is your anchor, sweet Maribel. Hold on to it." I knew she meant it. My mother had always seen the world in terms of foundations and anchors. It was the only tangible thing left of her, and I fought like a cornered animal to keep it. The house, built in 1968, was old, and old houses demanded constant attention. A leaking roof, a failing water heater, windows that rattled in the wind. These problems were small, annoying gnats at first, but they were growing into a swarm of wasps, threatening to drive me out. I worked 2 part-time jobs, a coffee shop gig and a bookstore clerk position, but every paycheck felt like it was already spent before it even landed in my bank account. The money wasn't for me, it was for the house. It was for Neoma's memory, it was for my anchor. My stepfather, Lowell, had remarried a year after my mother died. He'd brought Kala and her father, also named Lowell, into our lives, a tangled mess of new family dynamics. Lowell was a kind but ineffectual man, a carpenter whose business never seemed to take off. Kala, on the other hand, was an entirely different species. She saw the house not as a home but as a burden, a dilapidated relic holding us all back. She'd say things that sounded like concern but were laced with venom. "Maribel, wouldn't it be easier just to sell this money pit? Get a nice apartment?" She never used the word we. It was always you, as if the responsibility for this aging house was mine alone. The kitchen felt heavy with her silent judgment. Her phone was a constant presence, her face bathed in its blue light as she scrolled through perfectly curated images of other people's lives. She was an influencer, a word I couldn't even bring myself to say out loud. I just called it her online thing. Her online thing didn't seem to pay the bills, though. I'd hear Jareth, her husband, on the phone, his voice a low, frantic murmur from their bedroom at all hours of the night. Their life was a carefully constructed facade, beautiful on Instagram but crumbling behind closed doors. I couldn't shake the feeling that they saw the house as their ultimate prize, the end game to their financial problems. Kala would walk through the rooms, her fingers trailing over the peeling paint and the chipped trim, not with affection, but with the cold, calculating gaze of a person evaluating property. She once asked me, almost too casually, if I knew the exact dimensions of the property line. I told her I had no idea, but the question made my stomach clench. It felt like she was already measuring the space for something new, something that didn't include me. Her conversations with Jareth were hushed, but snippets would slip through the thin walls. Words like equity, market value, and cash offer hung in the air like a bad smell. I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid, that they were a family and that families took care of each other. But the knot in my stomach told a different story. I had to hold on. The house was all I had. It was Neoma's anchor, and now it was mine. They were renting an apartment in town, a place they presented as a temporary choice, a fun, modern alternative to an old house. But their things had been slowly migrating here. Kala's oversized vanity, Jareth's impressive collection of sneakers, a new high-end coffee maker that felt absurdly out of place on the worn kitchen counter. The house was becoming a museum of their aspirations, a space they were slowly colonizing. My own things were being pushed to the side, into the forgotten corners. My mother's old rocking chair, once the centerpiece of the living room, was now tucked behind a giant, chrome-legged sofa Kala had brought over. It was a slow, quiet invasion, one that I was too exhausted and too emotionally drained to fight. I was living with two ghosts, the gentle, loving ghost of my mother, and the cold, demanding ghost of Kala's desire. The air was thick with it, a tangible tension that made every breath feel like a struggle. One afternoon, while Kala was on a video call, I saw a text notification pop up on her laptop screen. It was from a bank. It said, "Urgent, your account is now in overdraft, final notice." My heart dropped. I felt a surge of guilt for looking, but also a vindication of my fears. Their life wasn't just crumbling, it was already broken. This explained the whispers, the frantic calls, and the way Jareth's eyes would flit nervously around the room whenever I entered. This explained Kala's sudden and intense interest in the house. This wasn't about family, it was about survival. They were drowning, and they saw this house as their life raft. It was a realization that hardened me, turning the soft, painful grief for my mother into a sharp, protective instinct. I had to guard this place, not just for Neoma, but for me. The house wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was the last line of defense. The war for my anchor had just begun. My father was blind to it all, or perhaps just choosing to be. He was a sweet, unassuming man, who wanted everyone to get along. He'd try to broker peace at the dinner table. "Now girls, let's not fight." But Kala's jabs at me were too subtle for him to catch. She'd pretend to offer help. "I found this great new financing plan for a new roof, but it's really complicated, Maribel. Maybe I should just handle it." And he would nod, oblivious to the subtext. He saw her as a well-meaning and ambitious daughter. I saw her as a vulture circling a dying animal. The animal, in this case, was my hope, my security, and my mother's legacy. It was a cruel and painful lesson to learn, that sometimes the most dangerous threats were the face of family. I realized then that I was alone in this fight. My father was on their side, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to believe that his new life was perfect. I was an inconvenient truth in his carefully constructed fantasy. The constant need for money became an obsession. I picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop, my hands perpetually smelling of espresso and burnt sugar. But the more I worked, the more I noticed the house falling apart faster. A pipe in the bathroom started to leak, leaving a dark, spreading stain on the ceiling. The front porch step cracked under my weight one morning. It felt like the house was conspiring against me, a silent partner in Kala's plan. I was so tired, the exhaustion was a heavy blanket, muffling every sound and dimming every color. I felt myself slipping, losing ground, and I knew that soon, the gnats would become a swarm, and the wasps would become a tidal wave. I was in a race against time, but I didn't know what the clock was counting down to. All I knew was that I was losing. The atmosphere in the house shifted, growing colder with every passing day. Kala's presence was a physical weight, her every movement a judgment. I'd try to find a moment of peace in my mother's old bedroom, but even there, I felt her eyes on me, her silent critique. I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to give up, to hand over the keys and the deed and admit that I couldn't do it. She wanted me to admit that Neoma's anchor was nothing but a burden, a chain around my neck. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. Not as long as there was a single ounce of fight left in me. I would not let her win. I would not let her take my home. She didn't understand what it meant. She saw a piece of property. I saw the last piece of my mother. The day Kala received the eviction notice for her apartment, the carefully constructed facade of her life crumbled just enough for me to see the raw, desperate fear underneath. The notice lay on the kitchen counter, its crisp white edges an accusation. I pretended not to see it as I poured myself a glass of water, but I felt the weight of her panic. She and Jareth whispered in the living room for hours, their voices low and sharp. She had always presented herself as a small-time influencer, a lifestyle guru, with a modest but dedicated following. Her videos were an endless parade of new clothes, expensive coffee, and perfectly staged home decor. She had convinced my father, and likely a large portion of the internet, that she was a burgeoning success. But the truth was there in that piece of paper. Her success was a fragile lie built on credit cards and borrowed dreams. The tension in the house was a physical thing, a thick, suffocating blanket of unsaid words. My own life was an endless, unglamorous loop of job applications and rejection emails. I was overqualified for the cashier jobs and underexperienced for anything that paid enough to fix a leaky roof. The coffee shop and the bookstore felt like a treadmill, a constant motion that got me nowhere. The house needed a new furnace, The estimate I'd gotten was a number so high it felt like a joke, a sick punchline to a story no one found funny. Kala's influencer life was a painful contrast. She'd order new clothes for a haul video, and the boxes would pile up in the living room, a monument to her frivolity. I'd be scrubbing a stain from a coffee mug at my job, while she was unboxing a designer handbag, all for the sake of a video that would get her a few hundred likes and maybe a handful of sponsorship dollars. The inequality of it all was a bitter pill to swallow. I was trying to save our home, and she was busy trying to build a fantasy. One night, after my father and Jareth had gone to sleep, Kala came into the kitchen and found me staring at the repair estimate. The number, a terrifying $6,000, seemed to mock me from the paper. "Maribel," she said, her voice surprisingly soft, "you know you don't have to live like this." I didn't look up. "I know, but I'm going to fix it." A cynical smile touched her lips. "With what? The coffee shop tips?" The sarcasm was back, sharp and cutting. "Look, Maribel," she continued, her voice hardening, "this house is a money pit. You're trying to keep a sinking ship afloat with a teacup. You need to let it go." She saw me flinch, and she pounced on it. "I'm worried about you. You're so obsessed with this house you're not seeing what's really happening. We're family. We should be helping each other." The word "we" sounded like a lie coming from her mouth. It sounded like a promise she had no intention of keeping. Her eyes, however, didn't hold concern. They held a cold, calculating greed. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about the house slipping out of her grasp. The next morning the doorbell rang, and Kala answered it. She came back into the kitchen, her face a mask of shocked disbelief. She held a thick, official-looking envelope, a law firm's name printed on the corner. Jareth came out, his face pale with concern. Kala ripped the envelope open, her hands shaking. A gasp escaped her lips. Jareth snatched the paper from her and his eyes widened. "It's from a lawyer," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's about a relative." They retreated to their room, leaving the air thick with mystery and palpable anxiety. They were gone for hours, the sound of their hushed, frantic voices a constant hum from behind their closed door. I tried to ignore it to focus on the task at hand, patching a leak in the bathroom ceiling with a makeshift bucket, but my mind kept replaying the scene. A lawyer, a relative. The phrase felt heavy with possibility, a wild card thrown into the middle of our desperate game. Later that afternoon, Kala emerged, her face a storm of conflicting emotions, fear, hope, and a strange, hesitant sort of joy. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in months. "Maribel," she began, her voice unusually soft. I might need your help." My skepticism was a heavy cloak. I crossed my arms, my heart a lump of cold stone in my chest. "Help with what, Kala?" She came closer, her voice dropping to a low whisper. "The lawyer said there's an estate. My mother's side of the family, a distant aunt I never knew. I need to find some old documents, pictures, things from her past." Her eyes, once full of a cold, hard greed, now held a strange, vulnerable desperation. The thought of helping her, of getting tangled up in her mess, made me want to run. But something in her voice, a thread of genuine need, pulled at me. It felt like an invitation, a fragile truce in our silent war. I thought about my own struggles, about the mounting debt, about the cracking step and the broken furnace. I thought about the sheer impossibility of fixing this house on my own. And then I thought about Naoma's note. "This house is your anchor." What if this was the way? What if helping Kala was the path to saving my home? What if her game could be my salvation? It was a reckless, stupid thought, but it was also a spark of hope in the suffocating darkness of my daily life. I didn't trust her, not for a second, but I was out of options. The house was failing, and I was failing with it. Maybe, just maybe, this was the Hail Mary I needed. I took a deep breath, pushing my skepticism to the side, and nodded. "All right, Kala, what do you need?" Her face lit up with a blinding, hopeful smile, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She promised me that if this inheritance was real, we would fix the house together. We were family, after all. The words felt hollow, but I clung to them anyway, as if they were a lifeline. The air was heavy with the smell of old paper and the dust of forgotten memories. Kala and I sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by an archaeological dig of her life before her father married mine. There were photo albums with peeling plastic covers, shoeboxes filled with tangled jewelry, and faded yearbooks. The lawyer needed proof of her mother's maiden name, a birth certificate, anything to tie Kala to this phantom relative. It was a tedious, painstaking process, and my heart wasn't in it. I was doing it not out of love for her, but out of a desperate, selfish hope. She kept talking about what she'd do with the money, an endless list of new cars, designer clothes, and a house on a hill. She talked about it as if it were a foregone conclusion, as if the money were already in her bank account. I kept my mouth shut, focusing on the task, my mind replaying all the times she belittled me in my home. The bitterness was a physical sensation, a tight knot in my gut. Her phone vibrated constantly, a stream of notifications from social media. A new post, another sponsored ad for a brand of teeth whitening strips she would never use. She'd stop our search to carefully compose a reply to a follower, her face a mask of practiced sincerity. The contrast between her online persona and the real, anxious person next to me was stark and jarring. She was an actress, and her stage was the entire internet. I, on the other hand, was just a girl, covered in dust and struggling to save her home. I felt a surge of pity for her, a fleeting moment of empathy. She was so desperate to be something she wasn't. And then, as if on cue, she'd turn to me and say something callous like, "Don't you wish your mom had left you something more useful than this old house?" The pity vanished, replaced by a cold, hard rage. She didn't get it. She never would. The value of this house couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. It was measured in memories and love. We found a small, worn photo album at the bottom of a box. Inside there was a faded, black and white photo of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Kala. On the back, in a graceful, flowing script, a name was written, Evangeline Allister. Kala snatched the photo from my hands, her breath catching in her throat. "That's her," she whispered, her voice filled with a reverence I had never heard before. "That's my Aunt Evangeline." The excitement in the room was palpable, a live current of energy. Kala immediately called her lawyer, her voice breathless and filled with a giddy sense of triumph. She rattled off the name, her free hand clutching the phone, her knuckles white. I watched her, a cynical spectator to her burgeoning dream. I knew what a dream could do to a person. It could make them reckless. It could make them blind. I just hoped it wouldn't make her forget her promise to me. The lawyer's response was a game-changer. Kala hung up the phone and turned to me, her eyes wide, her face alight with an almost manic joy. "Maribel," she said, her voice a tremor of disbelief, "it's real." The lawyer said that's all he needed. "It's real." She didn't say what it was, but I didn't have to ask. My heart began to pound in my chest, a frantic drumbeat of hope. It was a terrifying, wonderful, and dangerous feeling. Hope was a fragile thing, easily broken, but in that moment I clung to it. Kala threw her arms around me, a sudden, unfamiliar embrace. "We did it, Maribel. We did it. Oh my God, this is going to change everything." Her words were a whirlwind of excitement, a tornado of promises. She promised me a new roof, a new furnace, new windows. She promised me a life without struggle. I let myself believe her for a second, a fleeting, dangerous second of vulnerability. That night, my father organized a small celebration dinner. The mood was lighter than it had been in months. Kala and Jareth were laughing, toasting with cheap soda, already talking about their future, a future that sounded impossibly grand. My father, Lowell, kept looking at me, a relieved smile on his face. He saw the end of our financial struggles, the end of the tension that had been building between Kala and me. He saw his family, finally, at peace. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Kala's eyes, when she looked at me, weren't filled with gratitude. They were filled with a kind of triumph, a smug, satisfied glint that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the look of a person who had just won a game, not a person who had just been given a gift. The knot in my stomach was back, and this time it was tighter than ever. The tension returned with a vengeance the next day. A new package arrived for Kala, this one from a high-end designer. She immediately went to her room to film an unboxing video, her laugh echoing through the house, a painful mocking sound. I tried to focus on my job applications, but the thought of her just a few feet away, spending money she didn't have yet, made my blood boil. It felt like she was spitting on my struggle. I decided to call my best friend Odessa for a dose of reality. Odessa was a no-nonsense paralegal who would tell me the truth no matter how much it hurt. I told her everything, the phone call, the photo, the promise. Odessa listened patiently, her silence a heavy weight on the other end of the line. When I was done, she didn't offer comfort. She offered a warning. "Maribel," she said, her voice low and serious. "Be careful. A verbal promise is worth nothing. Get it in writing. Before a single dollar hits her account, you make her sign a legal document. Otherwise she's going to use you and throw you away." I've seen it 100 times. Her words were a cold shower, a painful slap of reality, and for the first time I felt a new kind of fear. Not for the house but for myself. I had given her a chance, and now I was scared of what she might do with it. The confirmation email from the lawyer arrived, and the house erupted into a frenzy of manic, hysterical joy. Jareth, Kala's husband, let out a whoop of triumph that echoed through the narrow hallways. Kala's scream of delight was so loud it made me jump. I came out of my room to see them, their faces flushed with a dizzying, reckless euphoria, staring at her phone screen as if it held the key to another universe. "It's happening, Maribel," Kala shrieked, her words slurring together with excitement. "The money is being wired this afternoon. Oh my God, we're rich. We're finally rich." She flung her arms around me again, a whirlwind of giddiness and expensive perfume. I felt myself tense, remembering Odessa's words, her stern warning, but in that moment, watching the raw, unadulterated joy on Kala's face, it was hard to stay cynical. She seemed so genuinely happy, so genuinely relieved. Maybe she really would help. Maybe this was the end of the war and the beginning of a truce. Maybe. I felt a pang of guilt for doubting her, a fleeting moment of empathy for the girl who had lived her life in the shadow of a lie. She'd been living a fantasy for so long, trying to project a life she didn't have. Now the fantasy was real, the money was real. It was a life-altering amount. I couldn't even wrap my head around it. $18 million. The number was abstract, almost meaningless. It was enough to change everything, to buy a new life, to erase all the years of struggle and debt. I watched Jareth do a ridiculous victory dance in the living room, a silly goofy grin on his face. For a moment, they looked like real happy people, not the anxious, frantic couple I had been living with for months. I allowed myself to feel a flicker of hope, a tiny, fragile ember in the cold, dark cave of my heart. Maybe my anchor was safe after all. The money hit Kala's account with the quiet finality of a death knell. There was no fanfare, no grand announcement, just a notification on her phone that she showed me, her hand trembling. The number on the screen seemed impossibly large, too many zeros for a single person to comprehend. Kala's face was a mixture of shock and disbelief. It's real," she whispered, her voice a low, reverent sound. She and Jareth immediately went into their room, and I heard them packing. They didn't say where they were going, but I knew. They were leaving the house. The invasion was over. The house would be mine again, mine and Neoma's. I felt a wave of profound relief wash over me, a sensation so intense it made my knees weak. I could finally breathe again. I could finally begin to heal. They were gone for 2 days. I don't know where they went. I didn't ask. I just reveled in the silence, the quiet, the peace. I walked through the house, a sense of ownership returning with every step. I ran my hands over the peeling wallpaper, the chipped paint, the worn wood, not with the calculating gaze of a landlord, but with the soft, loving touch of a homeowner. I was free. I was safe. When they returned, they were different people. Kala was dressed in a new, expensive-looking suit, her hair perfectly coiffed. Jareth was wearing a watch that glinted in the sunlight. They weren't the same anxious, desperate people I had known. They were polished, confident, and a little bit cold. My relief began to curdle into a vague sense of unease. They smiled at me, but the smiles didn't reach their eyes. They were the smiles of strangers, not family. Kala sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had spent so many nights staring at repair estimates. "Maribel," she began, her voice crisp and formal, "we need to talk about the house." My heart began to pound in my chest. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I steeled myself for the conversation, prepared to remind her of her promise, to ask about the legal document Odessa had warned me about. But she didn't talk about repairs. She didn't talk about fixing anything. She talked about selling. "We went to a real estate agent while we were away," she said, her voice a calm, unnerving monotone. This property is worth a lot, like a lot. It's too much to let sit here rotting. I stared at her, my mind reeling. But you promised, I stammered, the words catching in my throat. You promised we'd fix it, that we'd do it together. Kala looked at me as if I were a child who didn't understand. Maribel, don't be so naive. We have $18 million. Do you really think we're going to waste it on this old money pit? We're going to buy a mansion, a real home. The word we hung in the air like a taunt. The smile on her face was gone, replaced by a cold, hard sneer. She had used me. She had used my trust and my desperation. She had used the lie of family to get what she wanted, and now that she had it, she was throwing me away like a broken toy. The anger that surged through me was so powerful it made me dizzy. It was a white, hot, consuming rage that burned through my veins. You promised, I said, my voice rising, trembling with fury. You lied to me. You used me. She didn't even flinch. She just stared at me, her eyes dead and cold. Maribel, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, this is how the real world works. You were a means to an end. It was the only way I could get what I needed. And then she pulled a document from a briefcase on the floor. It was a formal, legal document. She slid it across the table, her fingers not touching the paper. This is your notice to vacate. You have 30 days. The document was cold and unforgiving on the kitchen table. It was a formal, sterile piece of paper, a stark contrast to the handwritten note from my mother tucked in a shoebox. It told me, in legal terms I barely understood, that I had no rights to the house, no claim to the property. It was the final, brutal punctuation mark on Kala's betrayal. I stared at the words, the black ink blurring before my eyes. My hands were shaking. I could feel the blood draining from my face. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a change of heart. This was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty. I looked at Kala, my mind struggling to comprehend the depth of her deception. She stood there, a strange, triumphant glint in her eyes. It's nothing personal, Maribel, she said, her voice as flat and emotionless as the paper. It's just business. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the table across the room. I wanted to grab her and shake her until she saw the truth, until she understood what she was doing. This wasn't just a house. It was my mother's legacy. It was my last connection to her. It was my anchor, and Kala was cutting the rope. How could you? I whispered, the words a raw, painful sound in my throat. How could you do this to me? She shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. You were going to lose it anyway. It was falling apart. I just sped up the process. Her words were a lie, and she knew it. I had been fighting for this house, scraping and saving to keep it. She just wanted it for herself. She wanted the land, the equity, the cold, hard cash. She didn't care about the home, about the history, about the love. She only cared about the number at the end of the real estate agent's appraisal. I called my father, Lowell, his voice a bewildered, confused sound on the other end of the line. Maribel, honey, what are you talking about? What's going on? I tried to explain, my words tumbling out in a frantic, incoherent jumble. Kala. She's kicking me out. She made me sign a paper. She's selling the house. His silence on the other end was a crushing weight. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. I don't understand. She told me she was going to help you. She said she was going to get you a new place. The betrayal was a multi-layered thing. It wasn't just Kala's, it was my father's too. A betrayal of his trust, a blind belief in a woman who had never shown any real kindness. He had been so proud of her, so excited about her newfound fortune. Now he was just a bystander, watching the wreckage of my life unfold. I hung up the phone, the rage inside me a simmering volcano. I didn't have anywhere to go. My part-time jobs barely covered gas and food. I didn't have enough money for a security deposit on an apartment. I was homeless. The realization was a cold, hard slap to the face. I had been so focused on saving the house, I hadn't prepared for the possibility of losing it. I packed what little I could, the same duffel bag and suitcase I had brought with me. Kala watched me, her face a blank mask. She didn't offer to help. She didn't offer an apology. She didn't offer a single word of comfort. She just stood there, watching me pack my life into 2 bags, as if I were a stranger she had to evict from her new property. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. My mother had left me this house to protect me, and now, because of a lie, I was losing it. I was losing the one thing that held me together. As I carried the last of my things outside, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, I saw Jareth in the driveway, a triumphant grin on his face. He was on the phone, talking to someone about a new sports car. Yeah, I know, it's crazy, right? This old house is going to be our ticket to everything. He laughed, a loud, obnoxious sound that cut through the silence. I stopped, and my eyes met his. His grin faltered for a second, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Was it guilt? Remorse? I didn't know. I didn't care. The betrayal was complete. I walked past him without a word, my head held high, and put my things on the curb. Kala came to the doorway. The smirk was back on her face. "Don't forget your guitar," she said, her voice laced with venom. "It's a shame. It was a nice guitar. You should have sold it. Maybe you would have had enough for a deposit on a new place." I didn't respond. I just stared at her, my eyes filled with a raw, heartbreaking mixture of pain and fury. I had been fighting a war I didn't know I was in, and I had lost. The first night in my car was a cold, lonely purgatory. I sat in the driver's seat of my rusted-out sedan, staring at the rear-view mirror, watching the reflection of my old home. The lights were on inside, a warm, inviting glow that was no longer meant for me. Kala and Jareth were probably inside, celebrating their victory. I could almost hear their laughter, a taunting echo in my mind. The world felt like it had been turned on its head. Just days before, I had been a homeowner. Now I was a woman living in a car, my belongings stacked on the passenger seat. The humiliation was a raw, stinging wound. I wrapped an old blanket around my shoulders, trying to ward off the cold and the shame, but it was no use. The shame was a fire in my veins, burning away my last shreds of pride. I had been so careful, so guarded, and still, she had found a way to win. She had used my hope against me, the one thing I thought I could trust. I called Odessa, my voice shaking with a cold, impotent fury. I told her everything, the legal document, the notice to vacate, Kala's cold, triumphant face. Odessa was furious. Her voice was sharp and clear, a beacon of anger in my sea of despair. "Maribel, I told you to get it in writing. I warned you." Her words were a painful reminder of my own naivete. I had ignored her warnings, clinging to the false promise of family. "She's a sociopath, Maribel. She's a monster." The words were harsh, but they were also a kind of comfort. Someone else saw it. Someone else understood the truth. I felt a small, fragile spark of resolve ignite within me. I was not alone. Odessa was on my side. She promised to meet me for coffee in the morning. I hung up the phone and leaned my head back against the cold window, my eyes fixed on the lights of my old home. I had lost the first battle, but the war was far from over. The next morning, I met Odessa at a diner near my old coffee shop. She looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed with a fury on my behalf. "Maribel, we're not going to let her get away with this." Her words were a lifeline. I told her everything I knew about Kala's life, her social media persona, her credit card debt, the frantic whispers I had overheard. And then I told her about the inheritance. I told her about the lawyer's call, the name on the back of the photo, Evangeline Allister. Odessa's brow furrowed. "That's odd," she said, her voice thoughtful. "I've never heard of a case like that. Usually when there's an estate, the lawyer just tells you what the inheritance is. Why would she need to find a relative? It's almost as if she didn't know where the money came from." A cold, sickening feeling began to creep up my spine. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "I'm saying," Odessa said, her eyes locked on mine, "that this whole thing feels off. I'm going to look into it. I'm going to find out where that money really came from. Something about this is a lie." I went back to my car, a new unsettling feeling in my gut. I had been so focused on Kala's betrayal, I hadn't considered the possibility of a larger lie. What if the inheritance wasn't real? What if it was a scam? What if Kala and Jareth were involved in something illegal? The thought was terrifying, but it was also a glimmer of hope. If the inheritance was a lie, then maybe the ownership transfer was too. Maybe there was a way to get my home back. I felt the first stirrings of a new kind of resolve, a cold, hard determination. Kala had taken everything from me. She had left me with nothing. but she had also given me a new kind of freedom, the freedom of a person who had nothing left to lose. I had been a girl living in fear, a girl trying to save a ghost. Now I was a woman with a mission, a woman with a plan. Kala had awakened something in me, a cold, ruthless part of myself that I hadn't known existed. I was done being the victim. The next few days were a blur of restless nights and long, unproductive days. I spent my time in a public library, charging my phone, sending out more resumes, pretending to be a person with a home and a life, but my mind was a constant loop of scenarios of what-ifs and what could-bes. I had lost the first battle, but I would not lose the war. I had to find a way to fight back. I had to get my home back. I had to get my life back. I needed to find a way to expose Kala's lie, whatever it was. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about justice. It was about making her pay for what she had done. And then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Odessa. It said simply, "I found it. Meet me." My heart hammered in my chest. I knew with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating that my life was about to change again. I was about to find out the truth. Odessa was waiting for me at the same diner, a grim expression on her face. She slid a manila envelope across the table. "Maribel," she said, her voice low and serious, "you need to prepare yourself. This is a lot." My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside were documents from the State Lottery Commission, an affidavit from a local pawnshop, and a handful of photos. The photos were the first thing I saw. They were of Jareth, Kala's husband, standing in front of a lottery ticket stand. He was holding a piece of paper, a grin splitting his face. The date on the photo was 6 months ago. "He bought a ticket," Odessa said, her voice flat. "A winning ticket. A Powerball ticket." My mind reeled. A winning lottery ticket, not an inheritance. A lie. It was a stupid, pointless lie. Why would they lie about that? Why not just say they won the lottery? I looked at the next document, a legal affidavit from a lawyer's office. A lawyer I didn't recognize. And then I saw the signature. It was my mother's, Oma's. A cold, nauseous feeling began to creep up my spine. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice a tremor. "This," Odessa said, pointing at the signature, "is the final brutal piece of the puzzle. The winning lottery ticket wasn't put in Kala's name. It was put in your mother's name. A blind trust was set up with a lawyer to keep it anonymous. She didn't want the world to know she was a multi-millionaire, and she didn't want the money to go to your father or to Kala. She wanted the money to go to you. She wanted to protect you from them." My heart stopped. I stared at the signature, a perfect, familiar signature I had seen 1,000 times on birthday cards and notes. It was real. It was her. My mother had done this. My mother had left me not just a house but a fortune. The betrayal was so deep, so absolute, it made Kala's lie seem almost trivial in comparison. She hadn't just stolen my home. She had stolen my mother's last gift. She had stolen my legacy. I looked at Odessa, my eyes brimming with tears. She gave the money to Kala." I stammered, the words catching in my throat. "She didn't," Odessa said, her voice filled with a cold rage. "Your mother died before she could finalize the transfer. The lawyer she was working with was old and sick. He died a few months ago. The money was just sitting there waiting. Kala somehow found out. I don't know how. Maybe she saw the legal document. I don't know. But she used your mother's death to get what she wanted. She found a lawyer to transfer the money to her. The lawyer saw a chance to make a quick buck, and he took it. He saw the money and he didn't care about the truth." The world felt like it was spinning. All this time I had been fighting for a house, a relic, an anchor, when the real treasure, the real legacy, had been a hidden fortune. The anger was a physical sensation, a painful burning fire that consumed every ounce of my being. Kala hadn't just used me. She had used my mother. She had used her death, her memory, her final act of love. She had desecrated everything that was sacred to me. I stood up, my hands trembling, my mind a storm of rage and disbelief. I had to confront her. I had to make her pay. I had to make her understand what she had done. Odessa grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Maribel, don't. Not yet. You can't go to her. You need a lawyer. We need to fight her in court. We need to expose her." But I couldn't listen. The rage was too strong. It was a force of nature, a tidal wave that was going to destroy everything in its path. I had to face her. I had to look her in the eye and make her see the wreckage she had caused. I had to make her feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. I had to get my life back, and I had to start now. The old house felt different as I approached it. No longer a beacon of my mother's love, but a monument to Kala's deception. The front door was a barrier between me and the truth, a final line I had to cross. I didn't knock. I just walked right in. Kala and Jareth were in the living room, surrounded by boxes of new things, a sleek coffee machine, a state-of-the-art television, a ridiculously expensive sound system. They looked up, their faces a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Maribel, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here." Jareth's voice was sharp, a cutting command. Kala's eyes narrowed. "I'm here for my house," I said, my voice low and steady. Jareth laughed, a cynical, humorless sound. "Your house? You signed it away. You're trespassing, Maribel. I'll call the police." I ignored him, my eyes locked on Kala's. "The money," I said, the word a venomous hiss. "The money wasn't an inheritance. It was a lottery ticket. My mother's lottery ticket. The one she left for me." The color drained from her face. Her confident, smug expression dissolved, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated fear. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice a shaky whisper. Jareth looked at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Kala, what is she talking about?" Kala ignored him, her eyes still locked on mine, a frantic, desperate pleading in their depths. "Maribel, don't do this. I'll give you half. I'll give you whatever you want. Just don't do this." The offer was a painful, insulting joke. She was trying to buy my silence with my own money. My rage, which had been a fire in my veins, solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was dangerous. "You don't get it, do you, Kala? This isn't about the money. This is about everything. It's about my mother. It's about what you did. You used her. You used her memory. You used her final act of love as a weapon against me." Jareth's face contorted with fury. "You lied to me," he roared at Kala. "You said it was an inheritance. You said we were safe." Kala was trapped, caught between two angry people, her lie unraveling around her. She turned to me, her face a tear-streaked mess of fear and desperation. "Maribel, please. Please don't tell anyone. We can work this out." But it was too late. The words were already in the air. A bell that couldn't be unrung. The sound of a siren cut through the air, and Kala's face went white. She had called the police on me. She had called the police to protect a lie. I stood there watching her panic, a cold, grim satisfaction settling in my gut. The police arrived, and Kala immediately started to cry, a cascade of fake tears she was famous for. "She's trespassing," she sobbed. "She's threatening us. She's crazy." But I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my eyes locked on hers. The police officer, a kind-looking woman with tired eyes, looked at me, her face a mask of weary professionalism. "Ma'am, do you have a right to be here?" I just pointed at the floor. "I do. This is my house. She stole it." Kala's sobbing intensified. "She's crazy. She signed a legal document. She has no right to be here." The officer looked at Kala, then back at me. "Ma'am, if you've signed a legal document, you have to vacate the property. This is a civil matter. You need to get a lawyer." I nodded, my mind clear and focused. I knew I needed a lawyer. I knew I needed to fight this in court. The officer looked at Kala, her voice a stern command. "Ma'am, stop crying." "And ma'am," she said, looking at me, "I suggest you leave now, before I have to arrest you for trespassing." I turned, and I walked out the door, the sound of Kala's panicked sobs a small bitter victory in my ears. The battle for the house was over. The war for the truth had just begun. The lawyer's office was a small dusty room in a low-rent office building. The lawyer himself was an older man named Oswin, with a kind face and a weary slump to his shoulders. He was a pro bono lawyer who took on cases others had given up on. He listened to my story, his eyes never leaving mine, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. When I was done, there was a long, heavy silence. "Maribel," he said, his voice a slow, deliberate sound, "this is a long shot. The document you signed is legally binding. Your only hope is to prove fraud, and that's a very difficult thing to prove. Especially with a family member. They will call you a liar. They will tear you apart on the stand. I nodded, my resolve unwavering. I know, but I have to try. She used my mother's memory. She stole from her. She stole from me. I can't let her get away with it. Oswin sighed, a long, tired sound that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. All right, Maribel. I'll take the case. A wave of profound relief washed over me. I had a champion. I had a chance. Oswin looked at the documents Odessa had found, his face a mask of careful, meticulous concentration. He looked at the legal affidavit, the lottery commission documents, and the photos of Jareth. This is very interesting, he said, his voice a low hum. If we can prove that this was a blind trust set up by your mother, and that the money was meant for you, and that Kala's lawyer used her death to illegally transfer the funds, we have a case. It's not a slam dunk, but it's a case. The words were a balm to my raw, wounded soul. A case, a chance, a hope. I had been living in a world of despair for so long. The thought of hope was almost overwhelming. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork, long phone calls, and restless nights. Oswin worked tirelessly, his every move a calculated, masterful stroke. He filed a motion to freeze Kala and Jareth's assets. He filed a motion for an emergency injunction to stop the sale of the house. He sent out subpoenas and legal demands. He was a force of nature, a one-man army fighting for me. He was a good man, a man who believed in justice, and I was so grateful for him, I could have cried. He saw me not as a victim, but as a person who had been wronged, a person who deserved a chance to fight back. He saw the truth and he was determined to expose it. Kala and Jareth were terrified. I'd see their frantic, desperate messages on Kala's social media. We're being harassed by a crazy person, Kala would post, her carefully manicured life crumbling around her. She tried to frame me, to make me look like a scorned, unstable person. But I didn't respond. I didn't fight back. I let Oswin do the talking. One night while I was sitting in the library, a notification popped up on my phone. It was from an unknown number. Maribel, the text read, "Please, stop this. Jareth and I will give you whatever you want. The house, $10 million, just stop this." The offer was a painful, insulting joke. She was trying to buy my silence with my own money. "It's too late, Kala," I texted back. "You had your chance." My phone immediately rang. It was her. I answered. Her voice was a desperate, tear-streaked mess. "Maribel, please. You don't understand. It was all a mistake. We didn't know about the trust. We just thought it was an inheritance. We'll give it back. Just please, don't tell anyone." Her words were a lie, and she knew it. She had found a lawyer who was willing to forge documents. She had used my mother's death. She was not a victim. She was a thief. "It's too late, Kala," I said again, my voice a cold, hard sound. "You're going to lose everything. You deserve to lose everything." I hung up the phone. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for justice. The day of the hearing arrived, and the small courtroom was a pressure cooker of tension and unspoken words. Kala and Jareth sat on one side, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes darting around the room like cornered animals. They had lost their smug, triumphant demeanor, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. They were no longer the confident millionaires of their social media. They were just two scared people who had been caught in a lie. I sat on the other side, next to Oswin, my hands folded in my lap, a quiet, almost serene calm in my heart. I was no longer a victim. I was a person who was about to get justice. Oswin began with a calm, methodical approach. He laid out the case, presenting the documents from the Lottery Commission, the affidavit from the pawn shop, the photos of Jareth. He presented a timeline of events, a meticulous, damning account of their deception. He showed the court that the so-called inheritance was nothing but a calculated, brutal lie. Jareth's lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man in a tailored suit, stood up, a smug look on his face. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "this is all hearsay. This is a crazy woman who is bitter about losing her home. There is no proof that her mother was involved in any of this." He tried to tear my story apart, to paint me as an unstable, untrustworthy person. He tried to discredit Oswin, to make him look like a cheap ambulance-chasing lawyer, but Oswin just stood there, his face a mask of serene calm. "I have one more witness, Your Honor," he said, his voice low and steady. "The man who gave her the documents. The man who saw the truth firsthand. I'd like to call Lowell to the stand." Kala's face went white. She looked at me, a silent, pleading, terrified look in her eyes. I just stared back, my face a blank mask. My father, Lowell, walked to the stand, his face a mixture of fear and pain. He was a good man, a kind man, a man who had been caught in a web of lies he didn't even understand. He looked at Kala, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. He had loved her, he had believed in her, and now he had to tell the truth. Oswin began to question him, his voice soft and gentle. "Lowell," he began, "did you know that your late wife Naoma bought a lottery ticket?" My father's voice was a shaky whisper. I thought she did. She always played the lottery." Oswin then showed him the legal affidavit, the one with my mother's signature. "Do you recognize this signature, Lowell?" My father looked at the paper, his hands trembling. "I do. It's Naoma's. It's my wife's signature." The admission was a death knell. Kala and Jarrett's lawyer was on his feet, objecting, but the judge just waved him down. The truth was out. The lie was exposed. Oswin continued, a relentless, unstoppable force of nature. "And did your wife ever tell you what she was going to do with the money?" My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a raw, heartbreaking mixture of love and shame. She told me she was going to use it to buy a new house. A new house for Maribel. She said she wanted Maribel to have a place that was just for her, a place she could call her own." The words were a physical blow. The betrayal, which had been a cold, hard fact, now had a name. Kala had heard them. She had seen the documents. She had known the truth, and she had used it against me. The courtroom was silent. No one made a sound. Kala and Jarrett's lawyer just sat down, defeated. There was nothing he could say. The truth was out. The judge, a serious, no-nonsense woman with a stern face, looked at Kala, her voice a low, commanding sound. "Ms. Kala, do you have anything to say?" Kala just shook her head, a tear-streaked mess of fear and despair. I don't know," she stammered, her voice a broken whisper. The judge just stared at her, her face a mask of cool, professional contempt. "I thought so," she said, her voice a final crushing blow. "I rule in favor of the plaintiff. Ms. Maribel, the ownership transfer is null and void due to fraud. The house is to be returned to Ms. Maribel's possession, and Ms. Kala and her husband's assets will be frozen pending a full investigation into their fraudulent activities." A low gasp rippled through the courtroom. I looked at Kala, and her face was a tear-streaked mess of pure, unadulterated agony. She had lost everything. The house felt like a ghost. It was my home again, but it was tainted, a symbol of all the pain and betrayal I had endured. The moment the judge had handed down her verdict, the world had seemed to shift on its axis. Kala and Jarrett were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, their faces a mask of shattered disbelief. They had lost everything, their money, their facade of success, their freedom. I had won, but the victory felt hollow, a grim consolation prize for all the heartache. The old, familiar smells of the house, the scent of my mother's perfume, the lingering aroma of coffee, the faint smell of old wood were still there, but they were now mixed with the acrid stench of Kala's lies, the bitter taste of betrayal. I walked through the rooms, a strange, profound sense of emptiness in my gut. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a tomb of memories, a museum of my pain. Oswin came with me, his face a quiet, compassionate mask. "You did it, Maribel," he said, his voice soft. "You won." I just nodded, a tear rolling down my cheek. "I know, but it doesn't feel like a win. I lost my family. I lost my home, even if I got it back. I feel empty." He didn't try to offer platitudes. He just stood there, a quiet, reassuring presence in the room. He understood. He understood that some victories came at a terrible price. He had seen it 100 times before. He had seen people win the battle, only to lose the war. The war for the truth was over, but the war for my soul was just beginning. I had to find a way to heal, a way to make this house feel like home again, a way to find a future in a place that was now so deeply tied to my past. The days bled into each other, a long, monotonous blur of empty rooms and silent hallways. I couldn't bring myself to unpack. My duffel bag and suitcase sat in the living room, a stark reminder of the days I had been homeless. I just sat on the floor, staring at the walls, my mind replaying all the painful memories. The moment Kala had thrown me out, the moment I had found out the truth about the lottery ticket, the moment my father had testified against his own daughter. The memories were a heavy weight, a leaden cloak that suffocated me. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't move on. I was trapped in a prison of my own making, a prisoner of my own pain. Odessa came to visit, her face a mask of concern. Maribel, you have to eat. You have to get back on your feet. You have to start living again. She tried to get me to go out, to have a normal life, but I couldn't. I was a different person. The girl who had been so full of hope and naivete was gone, replaced by a cold, cynical woman who had seen the worst of humanity. I was a shell of a person, a hollowed-out ghost in a ghost house. Odessa tried to talk about the future, about what I would do with the money from the blind trust, but I didn't want to hear it. The money was tainted. It was a symbol of my pain. It was a symbol of Kala's greed. It was a painful, constant reminder of everything I had lost. I didn't want it. I just wanted my old life back. I wanted the days when my biggest problem was a leaky roof. I wanted the days when my mother's ghost was a comfort, not a painful reminder of her final act of love. The phone rang, and the number was blocked. I almost didn't answer it, but something in my gut told me I had to. It was Kala. Her voice was a broken, tear-streaked sound on the other end of the line. Maribel, please, she sobbed. Please help me. My mind immediately went to the court case, to the moment the judge had handed down the verdict. I remembered the look on her face, the way she had looked at me. A silent, pleading, terrified look. She had lost everything. Her money, her home, her husband, her freedom. She was alone. Kala, I said, my voice a cold, hard sound. I can't help you. Her sobbing intensified. Please, Maribel, I have nowhere to go. Jareth left me. He took all the money he could. The police are going to arrest me. I'm going to go to jail. Please, Maribel, I don't have anywhere to go. The words were a painful, ironic echo of my own desperate plea. I had been homeless. I had been alone. I had been abandoned. And she had done it to me. I hung up the phone. I couldn't do it. I couldn't help her. She had caused me so much pain. She had betrayed me. She had used me. She had stolen my mother's last gift. I couldn't forgive her. Not yet. Not ever. I walked to the kitchen and I pulled out my mother's old recipe box. It was the shoebox where she had left the note about the house. I opened it and read the note, my fingers tracing the faded ink. This house is your anchor, sweet Maribel. Hold on to it. The words were a final, painful reminder of her love. It was a love that had cost me so much. It was a love that had led to this painful, brutal war. I had held on. I had fought. I had won, but I was still alone. I was still lost. A few days later, there was a knock on the door. I almost didn't answer it. I didn't want to see anyone, but the knocking was persistent. I opened the door a crack. It was my father. He looked older, his face etched with a new kind of pain. Maribel, he said, his voice a shaky whisper. I had to see you. I had to tell you how sorry I am. I just stared at him, my face a blank mask. He had believed in her. He had been a bystander. He had let it happen. He had let her steal my home. I should have known, he said, his voice a broken whisper. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. I'm so sorry, Maribel. He reached out to hug me, but I took a step back. It's too late, Dad, I said, my voice a cold, hard sound. He just stood there, his hands hanging at his sides, a look of profound, heartbreaking shame on his face. I closed the door. I was alone again. I was alone with my pain, with my memories, with my ghost house. I had won the battle, but I was losing the war. I had the house, but I didn't have a home. I had the money, but I didn't have a life. I was a walking contradiction, a woman who had everything and nothing. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, and I knew that something had to change. I had to let go of the pain. I had to forgive, not for them, but for me. I had to find a way to move on, to find a way to make this house a home again. I had to find a way to heal. I had to find a way to live again. The knock on the door came again. I didn't answer it. I just sat there, in the silence, listening to the sound of my own heart beating. I knew I had a choice. I could stay in this prison of my own making, or I could open the door and start to live again. The knock on the door came again, more insistent this time. I closed my eyes, a long tired sigh escaping my lips. It had to be Kala. It had to be. I knew it in my bones. I walked to the door, my heart a dull rhythmic thud in my chest. I opened the door, and there she was, a ghost of her former self. She was a mess, her hair a tangled ruin, her clothes rumpled and dirty. Her eyes, once full of a cold, hard greed, were now a tear-streaked mess of fear and desperation. She had lost everything: her money, her facade, her husband, her freedom. She looked at me, her voice a broken whisper. "Maribel, please, please help me. I have nowhere to go. I just got out of the hospital. I don't have anywhere to go." The words were a painful, ironic echo of my own desperate plea. I had been homeless. I had been alone. I had been abandoned, and she had done it to me. I just stared at her, my mind replaying all the painful memories. The moment she had thrown me out. The moment she had stood there, a cruel, satisfied smirk on her face. The moment she had told me she had used me. I looked at her and I saw not a monster but a broken, defeated woman. She was a victim of her own greed, a prisoner of her own lies. She had won the battle, but she had lost the war. She had everything she had ever wanted: money, status, a new life, and it had all crumbled to dust. I looked at her and I saw a reflection of myself, a person who had been broken, a person who had lost everything. But I had a home. I had a chance to rebuild. She had nothing. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the weight of our shared history. "Kala," I said, my voice a low, steady sound. "You can't stay here. You can't come in. You did this to me. You did this to yourself." Her sobbing intensified. I know, Maribel. I know I did. I was so selfish. I was so stupid. I was so scared. I was so scared of losing everything, and now I have nothing left. Please, Maribel, please don't leave me out here. I'm so cold." The words were a painful, heartbreaking sound. I looked at her and I saw a child, a lost, terrified child, who had made a terrible mistake. I saw a person who had been so desperate to be something she wasn't. She had destroyed everything in her path. My heart ached for her, not with pity, but with a deep, profound sadness. She had been so full of a cold, hard greed, but now all of that was gone. All that was left was a raw, aching need for forgiveness. I knew I couldn't help her. I couldn't let her into my home. It was still too painful. But I also knew that I couldn't leave her out in the cold. I had a choice. I could be like her, a cold, unfeeling person who turned her back on her own family, or I could be the person my mother had wanted me to be. A person who was kind, a person who was compassionate, a person who was forgiving. I took another deep breath, the decision a heavy weight on my soul. "Kala," I said, my voice a quiet, firm sound. "You can't come in, but I'll get you a blanket. I'll get you some food. You can wait on the porch, but you can't come in." "Not yet." Her face lit up with a small, fragile flicker of hope. She nodded, a single grateful tear rolling down her cheek. "Thank you, Maribel," she whispered. "Thank you." I closed the door and I walked into the kitchen, my mind a storm of conflicting emotions. I had offered her a hand, but I had also kept her at a distance. I had opened the door to forgiveness, but I had also kept her on the other side. I had a choice to make, a choice that would define who I was, and I knew that it wasn't going to be easy. But I also knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that I was finally starting to live again. The next day, Kala was still on the porch, wrapped in the blanket I had given her, her body curled into a small, defeated ball. I brought her a cup of coffee and a plate of toast, and she looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a raw, heartbreaking mixture of gratitude and shame. "Maribel," she said, her voice a raspy whisper, I don't know how to thank you. I'm so sorry." I just nodded, a quiet, simple gesture of acknowledgement. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The words were already in the air, A silent conversation between two people who had been through too much together. She ate the toast and drank the coffee, her hands trembling. She was a ghost. A shell of the person she had been. The arrogance, the coldness, the greed, it was all gone, replaced by a raw, profound sadness. She was just a person, a broken person who had made a terrible mistake. I went back inside, and I sat on the couch, staring at the walls, my mind a storm of conflicting emotions. I wanted to forgive her. I wanted to let her in. I wanted to tell her that it was okay, that we could start over. But I couldn't. The pain was still too fresh, the betrayal too deep. The memories were a physical weight, a leaden cloak that suffocated me. I couldn't move on. I couldn't let go. I was a prisoner of my own pain, and Kala was a prisoner of her own guilt. We were two broken people, trapped in a house that was a monument to our shared history. I knew that I couldn't rebuild my life until I had a final conversation with her. I had to find a way to forgive, not for her but for me. I had to find a way to make this house a home again, a way to move on from the past. I went back outside, and I sat down next to her, the cold hard wood of the porch a painful reminder of all I had been through. Kala, I began, my voice a low steady sound. I can't forgive you. Not yet. Not for a long time. You did something terrible. You took everything from me. You used my mother's memory as a weapon against me. You left me homeless. You left me with nothing. I can't just forget that. Her face was a tear-streaked mess of fear and despair. I know, she sobbed. I know, Maribel. I know I did. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the weight of our shared history, but I said, my voice a quiet, firm sound, I'm not going to leave you out here. I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you a place to stay. I'm going to give you a chance to rebuild your life. But you have to do it on your own. You have to find a way to make up for what you did. You have to find a way to forgive yourself. Her face lit up with a small, fragile flicker of hope. She nodded, a single grateful tear rolling down her cheek. Thank you, Maribel, she whispered. Thank you. I'll do anything. I'll do whatever it takes. I just nodded, a quiet, simple gesture of acknowledgement. I had offered her a hand, but I had also kept her at a distance. I had opened the door to forgiveness, but I had also kept her on the other side. I had a choice to make, a choice that would define who I was, and I knew that it wasn't going to be easy, but I also knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that I was finally starting to live again. The war for the truth was over. The war for my soul had just begun, and I had a long, long way to go. But I also had a path, and for the first time in a long, long time, I had hope. The house felt like a home again. It was a slow, painstaking process. Kala and I lived in a tense, uncomfortable truce. She stayed in the guest bedroom, a small, quiet presence in the house. She didn't try to talk to me. She didn't try to make excuses. She just worked, a quiet, methodical force of nature. She found a job as a waitress at a local diner, a stark contrast to her old life as an influencer. She was a different person. The arrogance, the coldness, the greed, it was all gone, replaced by a raw, profound sadness. She was just a person, a broken person who was trying to rebuild her life. I found myself watching her, a strange, profound sense of empathy growing in my heart. She had done something terrible, but she was trying to make up for it. She was trying to be a better person. And I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that I was finally starting to forgive. One night I sat down next to her on the couch, the same couch she had once sat on, a triumphant smirk on her face. Kala, I began, my voice a low, steady sound. I want to tell you something. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a quiet, terrified resignation. I'm so sorry, Maribel. I know I messed up. I know I did something terrible. I just shook my head. It's not that, Kala. I wanted to tell you that I've been thinking about my mother, about the lottery ticket, about why she did what she did. Her eyes, once so full of a cold, hard greed, were now a tear-streaked mess of fear and despair. I don't know what you're talking about, Maribel, she stammered, her voice a broken whisper. I don't know. I took a deep breath. the words a heavy weight on my soul. The lawyer told me about the blind trust, about the lottery ticket. My mother, she didn't want you to have the money. She didn't want you to have a life of luxury. She wanted you to have a life of struggle. She wanted you to have to work for everything you got. She wanted you to learn a lesson. She wanted you to be a good person. The words were a painful, brutal truth. Kala stared at me, her face a mask of shattered disbelief. She hated me? She whispered, the words a raw, heartbreaking sound. I just shook my head. No, Kala, she didn't hate you. She was worried about you. She saw the person you were becoming. She saw the greed. She saw the lies. And she wanted to save you. She wanted to give you a chance to be a better person. She wanted to give you a chance to rebuild your life. She wanted to give you a chance to find your way back. Her face was a tear-streaked mess of fear and despair. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a raw, heartbreaking mixture of gratitude and shame. Thank you, Maribel, she whispered. Thank you for telling me. I never knew. I never understood. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, my heart a dull, rhythmic thud in my chest. I had told her the truth, the painful, brutal truth. I had given her a chance to be a better person. I had given her a chance to rebuild her life. I had given her a chance to find her way back. I had given her a chance to be a person my mother would have been proud of. I went to the backyard and looked at the old wooden porch swing, the one my mother had loved so much. I sat down on it, the cold, hard wood a painful reminder of all I had been through. I had won the battle. I had won the war. I had found a way to forgive. I had found a way to move on. I had found a way to make this house a home again. I had found a way to live again, and I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that I was finally free.